Okay, Nitin, thanks for joining me, buddy. I appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me here, Dan.
Nitin is a good and dear friend of mine. We went to grad school together at Columbia SIPA, and one of the things that really struck me about Nitin is this passion and this thirst for knowledge, and this especially for things along the data world. And in fact, Nitin, you, if I'm not mistaken, you helped me through a number of quant and econ and decision models while we were at SIPA. So thank you for doing that.
Oh, of course. Yeah, I
So
think. Oh no, I
go
was just
ahead.
going to say. I also just wanted to say, like, you also helped me like expand my full idea of how to for video taking media and everything. I hope we touch upon that at some point of this conversation too.
I appreciate it. So on those notes, we are going to be talking a little bit about data,
Mhm.
and we are going to be recording this. So we are bringing the two worlds together. So exciting stuff. So Nitin, can you just talk briefly about your background and how you ended up in this career of bringing data and farming together? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, of course. I think how did I get into this particular gig that I am in right now? I think it was one of our classes. I think it was Global Food Systems. For one of the classes, I think the director of IR had come, Walter Bergen, and he was giving this class on how climate data was driving decisions in both in how changing farmers' ways of farming, but also how decision makers are using it in their own policy. It was a very open-ended class, just one class, but it was enough to strike a pretty good interest in it. So I remember going up to my art director at that point and be like, I would like to further see what I can do in this. So he introduced me to the head of the financial instrument team at IRI, Dan Osgood. And I started attending the meetings. The first few meetings, of course, I had no idea what I was doing there. I was like, why am I sitting here? These guys are talking about really scientific, intricate, hard to understand topics. But eventually I started understanding what was happening. I realized the value of what they were doing. And then I started doing it for one of my classes, for my Quant 3 class, which I don't want to bring any drama for Dan about that class. But yes, I started doing it for that class. And I did a project for them. And then once thing after the other, I started working with them, and it's 4 years later and I'm still here with them.
So have you always been passionate about data?
I think my general inclination, I would say less about data, is more about math. I think I did my undergrad in math, pure mathematics. Uh, I would say it's less about data, but just the general logic of things. So I always really appreciated how things would fall into place, whether it's just in math or anything else. So I think data was just the next step. It also was a very hot topic to be part of. So I have to give due both ways. So big buzzword data analytics, as well as my inclination to be able to do it, sort of went one after the other. So yeah, that's why the reason why data.
And you mentioned something just a minute ago about logic,
Mhm.
and so with climate change happening, I mean,
Mhm.
it is happening, and
Right.
and we're seeing it more and more every day. Um, Bringing that logic, the that again, that this is happening into the world of farmers, but not just any farmers that are predominantly in Latin America and Africa, and smallholder farmers. Um, Connecting those dots for them. Can you talk a little bit about that? About what is climate? What are these climate risks that they are, if they're not encountering already, that they will encounter?
Right. I mean, that's a good thing to start off with, just logic, because right now we know climate change is like a complex phenomenon. It's something like it's constantly evolving. It's not something which is like already like completely well defined and like said like, okay, this is what's going to happen in the next 30 years. This is how everything is going to play out. We know climate change is real for a fact, but at the same time, we do not know how its effects will be on whether it's on like whether it's farming or our own daily lives, or how we do our like how society will evolve, things like that. So we know it exists, but we don't know its repercussions. So how do we act knowing that, all right, if we don't know exactly how it will play out, how do we like start making decisions? It's a fast moving environment. So all of a sudden, you are trying to put a structure to something which is very constantly evolving. So that's where we try to come in, right? We try to do like risk management. We call it like climate risk management for the farmers. So the idea is we have all of this like climate data out here, whether it's in terms of like the satellite, whether it's like on the ground, whether it's like the farmers' own personal experiences about how the weather is changing. Because at the end of the day, they are actually on the ground. They use the weather to like grow their produce, right? So using all of that knowledge together, how do you create a system that they can use so that they don't fall into a poverty trap? That's the idea. There are other uses as well, of course, with climate data, but I think the ones we're going to focus for this conversation will be more towards like for the farmers.
Can you talk a little bit about that? You mentioned the poverty trap. What are the repercussions? What are the can you connect the climate risk with the poverty trap? Because are they more susceptible to climate, or what is a smallholder farmer for one, and how does this relate to them on a personal level?
So like when you say like smallholder farmers, it's like we're not talking about big, large-scale commercial farmers like we have in the US, right? Like they are pretty well organized. They have like enough like protection, things like that. So when you think about smallholder farmers, again, personally, for me, like someone who's from India, right? Like it's like a hectare or less small. That's like a size of a block, like a big block, like I think in New York standards, if I'm not like a building rather, if I'm getting that right.
more like a building. Yeah.
Yeah. So thinking about that is like, all right, so like they have like a limited source of income, but at the same time, what they do is so important for the rest like of the something going along the food supply chain of ours, right? Especially in countries like whether it's in India, like Ethiopia, Senegal, Colombia, Guatemala, all of these smallholder farmers, they provide majority of almost like you could say 80% of like the food supply. So like, of course, it's very important that they have a livelihood, but at the same time, if they don't get their like a livelihood out of it, not only will they lose out, but we also would lose out as a repercussion as someone going down the value chain of just purchasing what they produce is. So it's not just important for them, but for us as well, that they are able to sustain themselves in a comfortable way. Now, going back towards the climate part, why it's like a big impact for them. So like I already mentioned the fact that like their livelihood is like, it's like they go by year. So like if there is 1 year, they don't able to like get the income from the produce, it'll be catastrophic just because the livelihood is what allows them to buy the next year's seeds, fertilizers, support their family. So like all of a sudden they'll have to make hard choices of selling like assets like the sheep, their cow, things like, which provide security for them. So you're forcing them more towards like an area where they might have to give up farming altogether. And in severe case, they are like farmer suicides are it's a very big deal because it happens all the time, and then it's like it's hard to like mitigate that.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it seems like when we're talking about climate change or just the weather in general, is that the shocks that can come with the weather, right? Like something that seems very weather, believe it or not, has always been quite predictable, right? Like growing seasons tend to happen in certain time frames, correct? But now it seems like with climate change, and forgive me if I'm wrong or correct me, but it seems like with climate change, what seemed predictable is not anymore. Like if you, like with rice, right? Rice needs rain, but not when it doesn't need it, right? If rain comes at the wrong time, an entire rice crop is destroyed. And that rice farmer depends on that for not only their food, but also for, like you're saying, their income. And then we work our way down the value chain of that, if you will, so that, and maybe an entire local market could then have a shortage of rice. Is that kind of what's starting to happen, or is that the risk, or is that the fear that you have now, that it's becoming more and more unpredictable?
I mean, definitely, like that's like the part of climate change, right? Like every plant has a particular vegetation cycle, like when it requires water and when it doesn't require water. So and then the idea is, because of climate change, like it doesn't get the water when it needs to, like how exactly you explain. So that's where the risk part comes in, right? Like, so for the farmer, if like they're expecting it, they have like this generational knowledge and wealth about how they've been doing it. And they have been doing it forever. So like all of a sudden now they think like, okay, at a particular month they need to plant, and after that the next month they'll get the rain. But if the rain doesn't come, the crop fails. So that pushes them in towards that debt trap, which I was talking about before. So that is the fear over there, that now more and more farmers will have to face like this increasing climate risk around like how when they grow. So it's very important now for them to like start like understanding, okay, like what is risk and how do I like mitigate that for themselves?
So how do you mitigate that now? There is a risk now, right? Just like a bad driver has a higher risk, or driving in New York, my car insurance is off the charts because it's a high risk. So we know that there is this risk. How do you mitigate that? What are ways that farmers can be prepared for that? So if they lose an entire season, that it doesn't wipe them out, to be blunt.
Yeah, I mean, I might forget all the four in this. So basically, when you have risk, you have like ways of like dealing with it, right? Like you can transfer your risks to somewhere else. You accept what the risk is and you own it. You try to reduce the risk. And there's one more which I can't remember, but when I get it, I will let you know. So they are like methods like on how to like deal with risk, whether it's like climate risk, financial risk, any kind of risk that you have. And we do that ourselves in our daily lives, right? So now in terms of like for farmers, like we have like these certain interventions. So the idea is like not any one of them will do. It's always like a consortium of interventions that work together. So it's very important when we look at it. I'm not saying like, especially now when I explain these things, it's like, I'm not saying that any one of them is the right approach. It's, of course, everything has its own like pros and cons. And that's what, just to give a caveat before talking about them. So the two instruments that the interventions that we work on is, one is index insurance and the other one is forecast-based financing or anticipatory actions. So index insurance is like, now that you have brought up about car insurance in New York, Dan, you'll be a great prime example for me to explain the difference between the two. So like, for example, like a normal insurance, like as you just mentioned, Dan, like you have a very high car insurance premium. I wonder why, but there might be various reasons why. They might have just come in saying like, okay, clearly maybe Dan bangs his car quite often. He keeps coming back for the insurance. So his premium must be high.
It's also just where I live, like, because I live in a high risk area.
Of course, let's say that also. Good cover up. But no, it's also like, if you go to another individual, maybe like for your wife example, like they might be like, oh no, Janet's like actually she's super conscious. She like, she drives slowly, like taking all these factors and her premium is lower, right? So looking at that, they'll be like, okay, we have to go to each individual person to determine what your premium is. So like it's very tailored to the person. It has to be, oh, it's like you said, it could be tailored to the job, like to that area maybe as well. But the idea is like you looking at the factors of where like your individual age, whether you drink or not, whether you drive safe or not, do you drive within the say of speed limit. There are a lot of factors that need to be considered before tailoring a specific insurance contract for you. But now, if what index insurance does is it removes all of that and just says like, okay, what we're going to do is for people in a particular area, or as we say, for farmers in a particular area, if an index which we peg at, for example, let's call this rainfall, for example, here. If for a particular area for farmers, if the rainfall falls below a certain level, then automatically you'll get a payout, right? Instead of like, for example, if you banged your car, then someone has to come very specifically to your house, come inspect the car, look at it, see like, okay, did you take photos of the incident? So it's a very tedious logistical process. But over here, it's like pegged you literally get satellite data of like, of rainfall. You look at the data, it says like, okay, since the rainfall at this area fell below this, automatically for everyone in that area, no one has to go inspect the crop loss itself. The crop loss is taken out of the equation. We've put it under a rainfall, which is more easier to verify and logistically prove. So of course, there are like things that are wrong with it as well, like in terms like where things can go wrong with. For example, there might be people in an area where we say like, okay, turns out the rainfall fell shorter than expected, but on the ground, it turned out it actually didn't affect them as much because again, cloud patterns, things that's a whole different ball game over there. So they might actually not have any crop loss. So that's, or vice versa, where we say like, okay, it turns out you did get rain, but turns out this farm actually was just outside where it didn't get rain. So that's why we call it like basis risk. So there's a mismatch of like allotment of the funds. So there's also like the cons about it.
Okay. And the other, I don't know if I want to go into the other one that you were talking about, financing. Right. Is that that's different than the risk index insurance, correct?
Yes. So this one is a bit more broad. I think it's just also not just for farmers, it's just for governments in general. It's also, the idea is like to be proactive than reactive. So whenever a disaster occurs, whether it's like droughts or floods, like what happens is like it happens and all of a sudden government ministries, everyone are scrambling to like get the permissions, get the funds dispersed. Like it's precious time that is being lost trying to like get the right permissions where that could be used to like save lives or like, disperse medical aid or things like that. So like what happens now, it's more reactive, right? With anticipatory action, the forecast-based financing, the idea is that we have all of these weather forecasts, right? Like how you mentioned, like climate is predictable to a certain extent. It's not perfect, right? We have these forecasts that we use in our daily lives, but the forecast we use in these projects is not like on a day-to-day scale. We look at the forecast like, okay, is it going to rain tomorrow? Do I need to put on an umbrella? But take that decision making that you did there, but on a larger scale. Like instead of like for a day, you're looking at over a season. And instead of looking at from one day before, you're looking at 3 months before. Right?
Okay.
So like 3 months before, if I'm going to tell a government agency, like you have X% chance of like having a drought, what are the actions that you can take to like mitigate the damage or reduce the effects of it? Right? It's not happening for sure. We cannot say like, oh, we're saying with 100% this is going to happen. But even if we say like above 60, like above, like it's better than tossing a coin and just saying, okay, it's like 60% or 70% chance of this happening. What are the actions like which you can take so that you don't feel bad about it, right? Like, for example, you might take your umbrella tomorrow and it doesn't rain, but you don't feel bad taking about your umbrella. Your idea is like, oh, at least in case it did, I would be fine. If it didn't, it's still okay with lying in my bag. Right? So that's the idea, like to be proactive rather than reactive.
Now, my only question though, and concern about this is obviously like you said, in the index insurance, there's some asymmetries that don't line up. And with the forecast financing, I understand that. Well, then if you don't need the umbrella, it's okay. But what happens if you do need the umbrella? You need to have it. But it seems like these programs are only as valuable as the participation with either the local, first of all, getting buy-in from the local government, but also getting buy-in from just each farmer in general, especially if you're talking about index insurance. Is that a big challenge to, because again, with climate change or with the weather, you're asking a farmer to buy in, so to speak, on something that yet maybe they haven't experienced yet, or maybe there's the probabilities are going up, right? The risks are going up, but they don't necessarily see it yet. Has that been a challenge for you?
I mean, no, of course. There's also the idea that the money spent on like these, for example, like if you're believing that a drought happens every 1 in 5 years, so the 4 years that you're not pay, like, you're paying insure like a premium and nothing is happening, for a farmer, that is money gone, right? And then one could also argue that that money could have been better spent in like, getting like fertilizers, better like seeds, like drought resistant seeds, things like that. So how well it fits into like the toolkit itself is, of course, like something that we are researching as well, right? It's not something that I can say confidently, like this is something everyone should do and everyone should like apply to irrespective. Even with like, for example, the other one as well, anticipatory actions. The idea is, again, like we need to take actions so that like, there are no regrets after this. Like, for example, there's no point like an action of just saying like, okay, an information campaign of saying like, oh, how do you like better protect your house against drought? It's still a no regret action versus like saying, oh, we're going to like disperse all of this like construction equipment, and turns out like all of it was not required this year, but it would have been better if it added like the next year. Right. So things like that it's not a perfect intervention. And then like for buy-ins and like for farmers also, it's hard for them to like, like after all, it's like they are hard-earned money. But also at the same time, there are also other mechanisms where like the governments also like, subsidize it. They also like pay for it. We have, for example, ancillary actions. The government, the idea is to hand it off this like system to them so that they'll be able to run these systems eventually after we are done with it. So they have already bought into it. So like their Met department generates the forecast. The disaster relief like generates all the actions and they go implement it, even though in coordination with UN agencies, but they are the ones who are actually taking the ownership over it.
And can you think of any story or experience where this has actually benefited a farmer?
I mean, like that's the thing. Like, we have stories for sure, but I think it's again like I don't want to like attribute it directly to like saying like making it a like almost like a marketing campaign, like, hey, look, this farmer, he's smiling now. It's like we did our intervention there. It's hard to like, for example, to say.
Well, let me rephrase that as farmers, and I think this is a global. Forgive me, this is too broad of a statement, but I feel like farmers in general are starting to become more accepting of the fact that climate change is happening.
Right.
And that they need to be prepared. Have you seen anything like that where farmers are saying, or governments in general, or that are saying, yeah, we're really not prepared for this?
No, definitely. I would say like more concretely, I feel like they're farmers. For example, when we did like pilots in like Colombia and Guatemala, we were doing this like WhatsApp surveys where it's a game and they're playing to like get historical loss events. Like, so And it's a game you can play on WhatsApp. And one of the things like, farmers are doing is like they need to make like climate driven decisions. So you can see like, one of the requests that they have is literally it's be like, okay, how do we get like these weather related information from the government? So they're very clearly demanding that. So you can see like it'll be hard to say like how this information has benefited them, because it's of course like it's good for them to know, but I can't personally be able to say like, oh, I think I know for a fact that this is thing, because I have not seen that yet.
Well, and unfortunately, that's one of those things that I feel like the work that you're doing is so important, because it's building a mechanism that you hope you never have to use, right? But if you don't have to look far to see that again, climate change is a global phenomenon, and that sometimes, like you're saying, you don't know you need the insurance until you need it, right? You don't, or but it is good to have it there. And I think that if you look at how climate change is affecting cities, affecting growth patterns, that it only behooves those involved to become more and more prepared. So it's almost right now, I feel like it's almost a thankless task, but unfortunately, I would hope that it would never have to be used. But that would be very wishful thinking that it's not going to have to be. So yeah, I mean, this has been great. I've definitely had to wrap my head around it a little bit, but your examples are really right on the money. So what's next in the way this is happening? Are you basically just, are you reacting to how the climate's changing, or are you reacting to how farmers are accepting it, or is there new data and new technology that is changing this as well? I know that seems like three things, but it seems like a very evolving field. And so, what's next? Do you feel in this field?
No, definitely. I think in terms, especially for anticipatory actions or like forecast-based financing, it's a new field. It's not something which is like clearly developed, like in terms of like processes, protocols. They're like different organizations from like Red Cross, Start Network, us. We all are trying to like wrap our heads also around it. So we are working with like UN agencies, government partners, all to actually define this. Like it is pretty cool, like how we're trying to like quickly define it from scratch. So that is basically the next steps, is actually like trying to see like how this evolves and like what it turns into. And that is pretty exciting.
Awesome. Yeah, unfortunately, it is a necessary component of our lives now. Unfortunately, climate change prevention is not happening fast enough. That mitigation and how do we deal with it as it's happening now, is really important. And I think that's something that I, for one, just appreciate you having that mindset, that and you and your colleagues for thinking about that, of and unfortunately an inevitable. So thank you so much. Nitin, I really appreciated this. Hopefully I learned a lot. Hopefully you learned a little bit, but hopefully those listening and watching learned a little bit as well. Nitin, thanks so much. Miss you. We'll have to get together sometime, but I miss these talks more than anything. So that's why I really wanted to share you with not only our friends, but a greater circle of friends as well. So thank you.
Oh, great. Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me. Really, really appreciate the opportunity.
Hey everyone, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then please like and subscribe. You can subscribe by clicking the thumbnail on the screen. And last, if you want to hear the audio version of this and future conversations, then subscribe to my podcast on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Thank you, and see you soon.